Hey everyone, I'm Charles with Rocky Mountain ATV MC, and today I'm going to show you how to freshen up your top end on your 2018 and newer CRF250R and RX. Honda recommends replacing your piston every 15 hours of runtime, but we realize a lot of you guys are not going to replace your piston that often. So if you have any questions about the health of your top end, you can do a compression and leak down test, and that will help determine what repairs need to be made. Now for us, we're past that 15-hour service interval. We need to get our piston replaced, and we actually want to get a little more power out of this engine. So we're installing a Cylinder Works big bore kit on it. Now, this top end process, it will be similar for 2018 and newer CRF250Rs and RXs, but you always want to refer to your model specific service manual for more information and specs. The parts you need for your top end will depend on what you find during disassembly, but again for us, we're installing the Cylinder Works complete cylinder big bore kit. This comes with your piston, rings, circlips, wrist pin, you have your gaskets, and your cylinder. So it makes the job really easy. And then other things you need to keep in mind are cleaners, lubricants, we have coolant and an oil change kit. And while you're in there, it's a good idea to get that spark plug replaced as well. To gain access to our engine, we need to remove our seat, the side panels, our shrouds, and the complete exhaust system. I'm going to disconnect the negative terminal on my battery just to make sure I don't accidentally turn the motor over while I'm working on it. The next thing we're going to do is remove the gas tank, and for this we do need to tip it upside down to undo some of the connections. So we need to use a vacuum cap or just use something else to plug the gas cap off. And that way no gas comes out when we turn it upside down. We'll remove the strap from the back. We have a bolt up top. Now when you flip this over, we're going to go to the left side of the bike, and then if you look under here, you've got a tie. You're going to remove that from, there's that cooling line or the vent line, and you're actually just going to hang the gas tank from the left side, and this cable is what's going to be holding it in place. From here, you can make sure your connectors are clean. You don't want to get dirt in anything. So we're just going to disconnect our electrical connection and our fuel line. All right, so normally you're going to place a rag over this connector while you pull it apart, but just so you guys can see what's happening, I'm just going to pull this out. And if you spill any fuel, just make sure you wipe it up. And then last, we need to disconnect this cable. Now this isn't necessary, but I like to cover the fuel lines. And then from here, what we're going to do is drain our coolant, and I recommend draining the engine oil and replacing your oil filter as well. And when you reinstall the drain bolts, make sure you have new crush washers and torque them to spec. And this one's going to be torqued to 7 foot-pounds. We'll torque this to 12 foot-pounds. Next, we're going to remove the subframe, and we'll start by disconnecting some wires. First, we have this clip. We need to loosen that up. You can pull it completely off if you want. And then we have a couple accessory wires. I'm going to cut some zip ties really quick. Next, we're going to remove the cover over the starter relay. Then we'll remove the bottom connector. And this cover is going to be able to slide off now. And then we're going to disconnect this cable. Then I'll go ahead and disconnect my accessory wires as well. Next, we're going to remove the 4 bolts in the seat base. We'll disconnect this gray connector. That's going to allow us to swing that whole base to the side. Next, on the left side of the front of the airbox, we have this air temperature sensor we need to disconnect. And then we'll remove the breather hose from the valve cover. And then we can remove The remaining 2 screws we have in our subframe, we already removed the 2 lower bolts when we removed those steg pegs. Next, we'll loosen up the clamp for the air boot going into the throttle body. Then we can remove the subframe. Now I'm going to clean around this air boot and then just stuff it with the rag so nothing falls in. Now we're going to loosen the hose clamp on the intake side of the throttle body. We're going to pull the throttle body back and zip tie it to this upper rail on the frame. Then we're going to remove this retainer for the stator wires from the cylinder head. Then we can disconnect the engine coolant temp sensor connector on the back of that cylinder head. And while we're over here, we're going to disconnect this cooling line going into the elbow, as well as these 2 engine plugs. We'll be removing those. And again, since we're here, let's just take this engine hanger plate off. Now on the other side of the bike, we're going to go ahead and loosen up the hose clamp on this radiator hose, disconnect it, and then we'll remove the other engine hanger. Next, we're going to remove the ignition coil. Now these primary wires for the ignition coil, this longer lead is going to go to the bottom, and that hard plastic connector goes to the top or on that green terminal. After that, we can remove the spark plug with a 14mm socket. And now we can remove the valve cover. The next thing we need to do is put our engine at top dead center on the compression stroke. So we're going to rotate the crankshaft over until the 2 lines on these cam sprockets on each one is flush with the cylinder head. And then we also want to check the timing mark on the flywheel against the indexing mark that's on the flywheel cover and make sure all of those alignment marks are lined up. Now, with this cam weight facing up, this is top dead center on the exhaust stroke. So to get this top dead center on the compression stroke, we'll rotate the crankshaft 360 degrees. This weight will be facing the bottom of the motor. And again, just verify all of the timing marks are lined up and you're good to go. Now at this point, you want to check your valve clearance and make sure you're not going to have to put different shims in on reassembly. And if you need to know how to do that, check out our valve adjustment video on this bike. So at this point, we're going to remove the upper chain guide. After that, this upper cam sprocket bolt on the intake cam, we're going to break that loose. We're also holding the crankshaft still. Once that is loose, we can rotate the engine 360 degrees. So we're top dead center on the exhaust, and you always want to rotate the engine counterclockwise from the left side. Now it doesn't have to be perfectly at top dead center. You just need to expose the other cam sprocket bolt, and we're going to loosen it up and completely remove it. And then we'll rotate the engine one more full revolution to get this back on top dead center on the compression stroke. So at this point, you can use a cam chain tensioner tool, but we need to remove the tensioner anyway. So what we're going to do is loosen up this bolt on the back of our cam chain tensioner and then completely remove it by removing both of the mounting bolts. Now we're ready to remove the cam cap. Now we have a stopper bolt right here. We're going to loosen that up first. And then the remaining bolts we're going to loosen up in a couple of different steps in a crisscross pattern. Now when you pull these bolts out, keep them in order because there are a couple that are a different size. And then these 2 in the middle, these ones you're going to put new crush washers on when you reassemble. Then I'm just going to use 2 of the bolts from this cam cap. I'm going to put those where the valve cover normally screws into. That's going to help me pull it up and out. Now when you pull this out, you have an O-ring and 2 dowel pins. Next, we're going to take a little bit of safety wire or mechanics wire, and we're going to wrap it around the cam chain. And then I'm going to remove the cam sprocket bolt that we loosened up earlier. Just be careful to not drop this bolt into the bottom end. So now we can slide the sprocket off the cam and remove that cam sprocket. And we can remove the intake cam and then the exhaust cam. And we'll just hang that chain from the cylinder head. Once you've done that, we need to remove the shims. So at this point, we're going to flip the rocker arms back and remove the shims. Now when you remove these shims, make sure you keep them in order. Next thing we need to do is remove these two smaller bolts on the right side of the cylinder head. And I'm going to loosen the cylinder bolt at the same time. Now we'll loosen up the large cylinder head bolts in a crisscross pattern. With the cylinder head bolts removed, we're going to remove the two bolts on this bracket and pull the whole throttle body assembly back and then remove the cylinder head. So at this point, we're just going to let our cam chain drop down, and now to get the head off, it's going to be easiest to rock it back and forth just a little bit. If you need to, if it's really stuck, you can lightly tap on it with a rubber mallet. And when you're taking this off, there's two dowel pins that are going to be on bottom, so just keep an eye out for them. All right, now I'm going to remove the cylinder head gasket. Now we can remove this bolt from the cylinder. And when you pull this cylinder up, just make sure that you keep a hand under it. You want to catch the piston and keep it from slapping on anything. Now we can take some rags and we're going to put these in underneath the piston. That's going to help anything from getting into the bottom end. Make sure you locate both dowel pins that were in the bottom of the cylinder. Next, we're going to remove our circlip from our piston using a pick. I'm just keeping a thumb over that so it doesn't fly out. Now we can push the piston pin out, but ours is actually hanging up. So we're going to use a piston pin puller to pull this out. You do not want to use a hammer to get it out. If you do, there's a chance it could damage either the connecting rod or crankshaft assembly. Now that pin was super hard to take out, so we're going to want to pay special attention to this small end on the connecting rod and make sure there's no damage inside of there. The next thing we're going to do is remove this base gasket and clean up the sealing surface. All right, once you have everything cleaned off, you can inspect your cam chain. I'm going to pull this up a little bit and just kind of go through it like this. And you're looking for any points that bind up. And if you see any spots that bind up, then you know you need to replace the cam chain. Another thing you can look for is right where the chain contacts the sprocket. If you see any wear right there, again, you're going to want to replace this cam chain. And you're going to want to check these cam chain guides for any deep grooves in them. If they are grooved out, then you want to get them replaced. Now moving on to the connecting rod, we want to inspect this. So I'm going to spray it out with a little contact cleaner and wipe out any leftover oil in there. And now we're going to remove the rags from and around the connecting rod. Now to check the small end of the connecting rod, one thing I like to do first is look at the wrist pin. If you see any galling or grooves on this, then chances are there's going to be damage inside that small end and you're going to have to replace it. But if this is smooth and if you look down inside the small end, maybe you can run one of your fingers through there. If you don't feel any grooves or see any visible damage, then you're probably good on that. Now to check the connecting rod big end, what we're going to do is we're going to make sure there's no up and down free play. So this thing, it can move side to side. So I'm just going to move it to one side and then pull straight up and down on it. If there's any play at all, you want to get this replaced. but there is no play in ours. Now, to make sure everything is okay, you can actually do a measurement with the side clearance, and you're just going to use feeler gauges for that and measure in between the connecting rod and that crank web. Now, the service limit for our connecting rod is 30 thousandths of an inch or 0.75 millimeters, and we're going to jump straight to that service limit. And if you can insert this in the side, then it's going to be time to rebuild the crankshaft. But ours does not fit in that side clearance, so we know we're good to go. Next, we need to inspect our cylinder. So real quick, I'm going to remove the dowel pin from it, and then I'm just going to spray this down and we'll inspect the nicosil to see if we can even reuse this cylinder. To inspect the cylinder, we're just checking the nicosil coating. That's just a thin coating over the aluminum inside of there. And it normally has cross hatches through that. You want to check for those cross hatches. If they're worn away, you're probably going to want to get this cylinder measured. There are several different measurements in your service manual that you can do, but we're going to show you how the average guy can do this at home without a dial bore gauge. So the main thing we're going to be checking for is any scoring or pitting or flaking of that nicosil coating. And if you see any questionable spots on the nicosil, you're just going to run your fingernail over it. And if your fingernail catches on something, then that's cause for concern. You're probably going to have to get it repaired or replaced. Now you can see our cylinder has some vertical lines in it, and as I run my fingernail across, it doesn't catch on anything. So at this point, we just need to deglaze the cylinder, and we're going to be able to put this back into service. But for us, we are putting the big bore kit on, so we're just using the brand new cylinder. Now, last thing, if I flip the cylinder around and I run my finger across the area where the highest point the piston ring rides, if you can feel a ridge there, that's a good indicator that the nicosil is worn too far in, and you're going to have to replace the cylinder or recoat it. Now, if your cylinder passed these visual inspections, you can go ahead and finish cleaning it up. So we're going to clean the gasket sealing surfaces and finish getting rid of this carbon ring at the top. Now, to deglaze the cylinder, we do have a honing video, so be sure to check that out if that's what you need to do. And when you clean this cylinder up or do the final cleaning, what you want to do is use soapy water and some nylon brushes, and don't forget to spray a little bit of contact cleaner or run a small nylon brush or pipe cleaner through the oil passageway in this cylinder. Now, to inspect the other parts, you're going to want to do a good visual inspection on them, especially the camshafts. You want to check the journals for any scoring. Same thing with the lobes. If you see any obvious damage, you're going to want to find out what's going on. Now, for you guys that do have serious issues with the cylinder head, maybe you did a leak down test before everything was torn apart and noticed you had leak down past either of the valves. We are going to do a separate cylinder head rebuild video, so be sure to check that out. And really, that's all there is to tearing down and inspecting your top end on the CRF250R and RX. So that's it for part 1 of this series. Follow us over to the next video. We're going to show you how to assemble everything. And if you need any parts for your top end, be sure to get those on our website and subscribe to our channel for more helpful content. Thanks for watching.